The white silk of Rose's wedding dress snagged on a thorny bush, ripping with a sound that tore through the quiet Texas air. She didn't stop. She couldn't. Behind her, the sounds from the church were fading, but not fast enough. Her father's rage, her would-be husband's demands, they were a storm at her back, promising a life she would rather die than live. "I won't do it," she gasped, the words stolen by the wind. "I won't marry that monster." The sun was a hammer, beating down on the endless sea of grass. Rose's hands, once pampered and soft, were already a roadmap of scratches and blood. The pearl pins in her hair were long gone, lost to the prairie, and her golden locks whipped around her face, matted with sweat and dirt. She ran. Time melted away. Minutes felt like hours. The grand wedding, the seal of her doom to Marcus Thornfield, was now just a blur of panicked faces and her own whispered apologies as she fled down the aisle and out into the wild. Her ankle twisted in a hidden prairie dog hole, and a cry of pain ripped from her throat. She collapsed into the tall grass, the wedding dress, a garment worth a small fortune, now a ruined shroud of silk and filth. But it didn't matter. Freedom was worth more. "Think, Rose, think," she pleaded with herself, trying to get her bearings. The sun was bleeding across the western sky, painting it in violent shades of orange and red. She had no idea where she was. She only knew she was away from Millbrook Township, away from him. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Not one horse, but several. A cold dread, colder than any winter night, seeped into her bones. They had found her trail. Panic was a wild animal clawing at her insides. She forced herself up, the pain in her ankle a white-hot scream. She limped, she stumbled, she pushed forward. The voices were getting closer. Her father's bellow was unmistakable. "Rose, you get back here this instant. You're making a fool of our entire family." A fool, she thought, tears of rage and desperation streaming down her cheeks. He was the fool. He was the one who'd sell his own daughter to a man with cruelty in his eyes and rumors of darkness clinging to him like a second skin. Her lungs burned. Her legs were screaming for rest. The prairie offered no hiding place, no sanctuary. And just when she thought her body would give out, just when she was about to fall and surrender to her fate, she saw him. He was a silhouette against the dying sun, a warrior on a painted horse, as still and silent as the land itself. As she staggered closer, the details sharpened. He was tall, powerful, his skin the color of rich earth. Eagle feathers were woven into his long, black hair. His chest was bare, adorned with an intricate breastplate of bone and beads. A Comanche. She knew it instantly. She'd heard the stories, the fearful whispers of savages who roamed these plains. But the man before her didn't look like a savage. He looked like a king. His eyes, dark and piercing, met hers, and in that moment, the world stopped. The shouts of her pursuers, the pain in her ankle, the terror in her heart, it all vanished. There was only the silent communication passing between them, an electric current across the sea of grass. His name was Niati, and he had been tracking a different prey when he saw the impossible sight. A woman in a white dress, like a ghost floating across his people's land. He watched her with caution. White settlers were a plague, a sign of trouble. But this one was different. She was alone, broken, running for her life. As she drew near, he saw the raw desperation in her emerald green eyes, the blood on her hands, the way she favored her ankle. And against all his better judgment, he felt something stir within him, a fierce, primal need to protect this strange, golden-haired creature. "Please," Rose gasped, her strength finally failing her as she reached his horse. "Please, help me." She collapsed at the horse's feet, the ruined wedding dress pooling around her. The sound of the approaching riders was a thunderous roar now. Niati's face hardened. He saw the dust clouds, heard the angry shouts of men who thought they owned this land. Without a word, he swung down from his horse. His grace was like that of a panther, fluid and deadly. Rose looked up at him, her eyes wide with a fragile mix of hope and terror. He was even more intimidating up close, a giant carved from muscle and stone. His face was all harsh angles, but his eyes held a depth that seemed to see right into her soul. "You run from marriage?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, his English clear but accented. Rose stared, shocked that he knew. "The dress," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "White women wear such things to join with a man. But you run." "Yes," she whispered, feeling naked under his gaze. "I couldn't. He's a terrible man." The riders were almost upon them. Rose could hear her father shouting her name, his voice thick with fury. "Please," she begged again, her hand instinctively reaching out, her pale fingers brushing against the warm, bronze skin of his arm. The touch was a spark, a jolt of lightning that passed between them, holding them both captive for a heart-stopping second. There was wisdom in his eyes and pain, and something else. Something that made her heart pound in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Then he moved. In one swift motion, he bent and scooped her into his arms. She was weightless to him. A gasp escaped her lips as she was lifted against his hard chest, her arms flying around his neck. He smelled of sage and leather and the wild earth. He placed her on his horse and swung up behind her, his powerful arms caging her against him as he took the reins. She had never been this close to a man. The solid wall of his chest against her back, the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his breath in her hair. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and thrilling all at once. "Hold tight," he commanded. And then they were flying. The horse moved like the wind, Nieti guiding it effortlessly over the treacherous ground. Rose clung to its mane, the wedding dress whipping around them like a flag of surrender and defiance. The shouts of her pursuers faded into the distance, swallowed by the vast, unforgiving wilderness. She was alone with a Comanche warrior, riding into an unknown fate. She should have been petrified, but for the first time in months, she felt completely and utterly safe. As the last sliver of sun vanished, Niati slowed the horse. They were deep in a land she didn't recognize, a land untouched and wild. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "Somewhere they will not find you," he replied, his voice a low vibration against her ear. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cooling night air traced its way down her spine. The stars began to appear, scattered like diamonds on black velvet. Niati finally stopped by a hidden creek, the sound of trickling water a balm to her frayed nerves. She realized she must have dozed off, lulled to sleep by the rhythm of the horse and the solid warmth of the man behind her. He dismounted and reached up for her. As he lifted her down, her body slid slowly along his. For a breathless moment, they stood chest to chest, his hands firm at her waist. The moonlight made him look like a god of the night, his features carved from shadow and silver. "You are safe now," he murmured, and the simple words were a promise she desperately wanted to believe. But as he looked down at her, a strange new expression crossed his face. His eyes weren't just looking at her, they were looking through her. He stepped back suddenly, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. "That dress," he said, his voice tight, "it is a bad omen." Rose looked down at the tattered silk. "I know. It's all I have." He shook his head, a grim set to his jaw. "My mother, she wore a dress like that, the day my father's war party found her." Rose's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a chance encounter. This was something else entirely. "She was a captive?" Rose whispered, her own situation suddenly feeling 1,000 times more precarious. "At first," Aniati said, his eyes distant, "but she chose to stay. She became one of us. She taught me your tongue." He turned away, beginning to build a fire with practiced, efficient movements. "But the dress, it reminds me of the day she lost her world, and the day our world began to end." The fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows that made the warrior look even more formidable. Rose suddenly felt a new kind of fear. Not of him, but of the history that seemed to hang between them, as tangible as the cool night air. She wasn't just a runaway bride he had saved. To him, she was a symbol, a ghost from his past, and she had no idea if that made her a welcome guest or a prisoner. He told her his name was Niati, he who wrestles. It suited him. He moved with a wrestler's coiled power, every motion deliberate and strong. He shared a piece of dried meat with her, and the simple food tasted better than any feast she'd ever had. As they ate in silence, The weight of his mother's story settled between them. Rose realized her rescue was not a simple act of kindness. It was tangled up in his own pain, his own memories. "This Marcus," Niati said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Tell me of him." Rose flinched. The name alone felt like a bruise. "He is powerful. My father owed him a great deal of money. I was the payment." "So you were property," Niati stated, his voice flat and hard. It was a brutal assessment, but it was the truth. "In my world, women are often treated as such," Rose admitted quietly. "That is why I ran. I heard stories about his other wives, about what he did to them in private." A dangerous light flared in Niati's eyes. "He would have hurt you." "Yes," she whispered, the confession hanging in the air. "I believe he would have." Niati stared into the fire, his jaw tight. "Some white men are like rabid dogs. They take and destroy until something stops them." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "My mother, she ran from a man like that too. That's why she chose to stay with us. She said even as a captive, she was more free with my people than she ever was in her own world." The parallel was chilling. Rose felt like she was living a story that had already been written, a ghost walking in another woman's footsteps. Was this her fate? To be saved by a Comanche warrior, only to live in the shadow of the white woman who came before her? The thought sent a fresh wave of despair through her. She hadn't just escaped a cage. She had run straight into a memory, and she worried that Niati would never be able to see her, Rose, for who she was. He would only ever see the reflection of his lost mother in a torn white dress. Just as she was about to resign herself to this strange fate, Niati did something unexpected. He reached across the fire and gently touched a scratch on her cheek. His touch was surprisingly soft. "But you are not her," he said, as if reading her mind. "Her eyes were the color of the summer sky. Yours are the color of new leaves in spring. Your story is not hers." The simple words were a lifeline. He saw her. He truly saw her. A wave of relief so powerful it made her dizzy washed over Rose. Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to fall. She wasn't a ghost. She was real. Niati moved around the fire and sat beside her on the smooth boulder. He didn't speak. He just sat with her, his solid presence a comfort in the vast, lonely wilderness. After a long while, she found her voice. "What happened to her? Your mother?" "The sickness," he said, his voice low with grief. "It came with the new settlers. It took many of our people. It took her." But then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But I do not believe it was the sickness. Not for her." Rose's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "She was a healer," Niati explained. "She knew the white man's medicines and our own. She was strong. And then, she was gone. It was too fast." He looked out into the darkness, his eyes narrowed. "And it happened right after she had a dispute with a trader. A man who wanted to buy land he had no right to. A man who threatened her when she refused to help him convince our chief." A cold knot formed in Rose's stomach. She had a terrible feeling she knew where this was going. "What was his name?" she whispered, almost afraid to hear the answer. Niati turned to look at her, his dark eyes boring into hers. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing the raw hatred etched there. "His name was Thornfield," he said. "Marcus Thornfield." The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a cruel twist of fate. It was a spider's web, and she had been caught in the center of it since the day she was born. Marcus Thornfield, the man she was supposed to marry, the man who had haunted her nightmares. He wasn't just a cruel suitor. He was a monster, a murderer. And somehow Niati knew it. The revelation hung between them, thick and poisonous. Marcus hadn't just been buying a wife. He had been trying to acquire a connection, a way back into this territory, perhaps to finish what he started. And her father, had he known? Was his debt a lie? Was he a willing participant in this monstrous plan? Every certainty Rose had ever had crumbled into dust. She wasn't just a runaway. She was a witness, a loose end. And the man who had saved her was the son of the woman her fiancé had murdered. The silence was broken by the snap of a twig in the darkness beyond the firelight. Niati was on his feet in an instant, a knife appearing in his hand as if from nowhere. He moved with a silent, deadly grace, placing himself in front of Rose. They weren't alone. "Who's there?" Niati called out, his voice a low growl. There was a rustle in the bushes, and then a figure stepped into the light. It was a Comanche warrior, but he wasn't from Niati's tribe. His markings were different, and his face was set in a hard, unfriendly sneer. He was not alone. Two more warriors emerged from the shadows behind him, their arrows nocked and ready. "Niati," the lead warrior said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I knew I smelled a traitor, hiding in the dark with a white woman." "She is under my protection, Kono," Niati said, his voice dangerously calm. "This does not concern you." "Everything the son of the chief does concerns me," Kono shot back, "especially when he brings one of them into our lands. Have you forgotten what they do? What they bring? Sickness, death." Kono's eyes raked over Rose's torn dress with disgust. "Look at her. She is a bad omen. She will bring ruin to us all." Rose shrank back, the man's hatred a physical blow. She was the enemy here, a symbol of the destruction of his people. "She is not the enemy," Niati insisted, standing his ground. "The enemy is a man named Thornfield. This woman, she escaped from him. She can help us prove what he did." Kono laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You expect us to believe the word of a white woman? She lies. It is in her nature. She has probably enchanted you with her pale skin and yellow hair." He took a step forward, his eyes fixed on Rose. "We should kill her now. Cleanse the land of her filth before it spreads." Niati shifted his stance, his body a coiled spring of lethal intent. "You will not touch her." The tension was so thick Rose could barely breathe. This was a conflict that ran deeper than her arrival. There was history here, a rivalry between these two men that was about to explode. "You are weak, Niati," Kono sneered. "Your mother's blood made you soft. You care more for this outsider than for the safety of your own people." He raised his hand, and his warriors raised their bows. "Step aside, or die with her." The choice was clear. Niati could save himself by giving her up. It was the logical thing to do, her life versus his. But Niati didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there, a lone warrior ready to fight three men for a woman he barely knew. A woman his rival was calling a curse upon their people. But just as the bowstrings were about to be released, a new sound cut through the night, the high, piercing cry of a hawk. It was a signal. Kono and his men froze, their heads snapping up. From the darkness, more figures emerged, but these warriors bore the same markings as Niati. They were his people, and they were led by an older man with silver-streaked hair and an air of undeniable authority. The chief, Niati's father. "Kono," the chief said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of command. "Lower your weapons." Kono hesitated, his face a mask of fury and resentment, but the chief's gaze was like granite. Reluctantly, Kono gestured for his men to stand down. The chief's eyes moved from Kono to his son, and then they settled on Rose. She felt herself being judged, weighed, and measured by this powerful man. His expression was unreadable, his face a testament to a life of hardship and leadership. "My son," the chief said, turning his attention fully to Niati. "You were told not to act alone. You were told to wait for the council's decision." "Thornfield made his move," Niati argued. "He was to be married to her. I could not let that happen. She is the key." The chief looked at Rose again, his gaze lingering on her tattered dress, her pale, frightened face. "She is a risk," he said simply. "A great one." He then turned his steely gaze back to Kono. "But she is a risk we must now manage. She is under my son's protection, which means she is under the protection of our tribe. Is that understood?" Kono's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt, angry nod. He shot one last venomous look at Rose before melting back into the darkness with his men. The immediate danger had passed, but a new, more complicated one had just begun. Rose was no longer just a runaway. She was a political pawn in a tribal conflict, a symbol of division, and the living proof of a murder that could bring war crashing down on all of them. The chief, whose name was Tavibo, led them to the Comanche camp. It was a sprawling collection of teepees nestled in a hidden valley, protected by cliffs on three sides. Smoke from dozens of fires curled into the night sky, and the sounds of life, dogs barking, children laughing, the low murmur of conversation filled the air. It was a world away from the manicured lawns and stuffy ballrooms of Boston. As they entered the camp, a hush fell. Everyone stopped what they were doing to stare. They stared at Niati, their chief's son, returning not with game, but with a white woman in a ruined wedding dress. Rose felt hundreds of eyes on her, a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and outright hostility. She was an alien here, an invader. Tavibo led them to his own large teepee in the center of the camp. Inside, the firelight cast a warm glow on painted hides and soft furs. He gestured for Rose to sit. "You claim the man you fled, Marcus Thornfield, is responsible for the death of my wife," Tavibo said, his voice devoid of emotion. Rose's throat was dry. I I didn't know your wife, but Niati believes, and the stories I heard about Marcus, he is a man capable of anything. Beliefs and stories are not proof, Tavibo said, his eyes hard. My son acts with his heart. It is his strength and his weakness. I must act with my head. Bringing you here puts my people in grave danger. The white soldiers will use any excuse to attack us. A missing white woman is the best excuse of all. I will not tell them I am here, Rose promised desperately. I never want to see my people again. Tavibo studied her for a long moment. Perhaps, but your world has a way of finding what it has lost, especially when it is valuable. He looked at Niati. Kono is right about one thing. She is an omen. Her arrival marks a turning point, either toward justice for your mother or toward a war that will destroy us. The weight of his words was crushing. Rose wasn't just fighting for her own freedom anymore. The fate of an entire tribe now rested on her shoulders. Over the next few days, Rose learned what it was to be an outcast. Most of the tribe ignored her, turning their backs when she approached. The children would whisper and point. The women in particular looked at her with suspicion. Kono made sure to stoke the flames of their fear, speaking loudly of the curses white people brought with them whenever he saw her. Only Niati and his father treated her with any measure of kindness, but even Tavibo remained distant and watchful. Niati brought her a simple deerskin dress to replace the tattered wedding gown, which he burned in a ritual fire, an act that seemed to both cleanse the camp and sever her final tie to her old life. He taught her a few words of his language. He showed her how to find edible roots, but there was a distance between them now, a formality that hadn't been there by the creek. He was the chief's son, and she was the unwelcome guest. One evening, a young woman approached Rose as she sat alone by the river. Her name was Chayton, and her eyes were filled with a cold fire. "You should not be here," Chayton said, her English perfect and crisp. Rose was startled. "Niati's mother taught many of us," Chayton explained, answering the unasked question. "She was a good woman. And you are an insult to her memory." "I mean no disrespect," Rose said softly. "You are everything she ran from," Chayton sneered. "Soft, weak, useless. Niati pities you, that is all. He will grow tired of his pet project and cast you aside. You should leave before he does. It will be less humiliating for you." The words were like sharp stones. Rose knew there was truth in them. She was weak. She was useless here. She couldn't ride like the Comanche women, or tan a hide, or build a fire with nothing but two sticks. She was an ornament, and a broken one at that. Humiliation and despair washed over her. Maybe Chayton was right. Maybe she should just walk out into the prairie and let the wilderness take her. It would be better than bringing ruin upon these people, better than enduring the daily scorn. That night she couldn't sleep. The weight of her situation, the hatred from the tribe, and Chayton's cruel words echoed in her mind. She slipped out of the small teepee Niati had given her and walked to the edge of the cliffs overlooking the valley. The moon was full, illuminating the vast empty plains beyond the camp. It looked so peaceful, so final. She could just step off. It would all be over. The pain, the fear, the burden she had become. "I thought I might find you here." Niati's voice came from the darkness behind her. He walked to her side, his presence a familiar comfort. He didn't ask what she was doing. He seemed to already know. "My mother used to come here when she felt trapped," he said quietly, looking out at the moonlit landscape. "She said the land was so big, it made her problems feel small." "I am not like your mother," Rose whispered, her voice breaking. "I am not strong. I don't belong here. Everyone hates me. I am a curse." "No," Niati said, his voice firm. He turned to face her, his hands gently taking hers. They were warm and strong. "You are not a curse. You are a survivor. You survived your father. You survived Marcus. You will survive this." He looked deep into her eyes. "Chaitin is wrong. I do not pity you. I admire you. You have a fire in your spirit that they cannot see, a courage you do not even know you possess." He lifted a hand and gently brushed a stray tear from her cheek. "Do not let them put out that fire, Rose. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." In that moment, under the vast Texas sky, something shifted between them. The distance vanished. He was no longer just the chief's son, and she was no longer just the outsider. They were just two people, finding solace in each other's presence. But their moment of connection was shattered by a sudden commotion from the camp below. Shouts of alarm, the frantic barking of dogs. Niati stiffened, his head snapping toward the sound. "Stay here," he commanded, before turning and sprinting back toward the camp. Rose watched him go, her heart pounding. She couldn't stay here. She had to know what was happening. She scrambled down the rocky path after him. When she reached the edge of the camp, she saw a scene of chaos. Torches flickered wildly, illuminating panicked faces. In the center of the camp, a teepee was engulfed in flames. It was the teepee where the tribe's winter food supply was stored. Sabotage. As the warriors frantically tried to douse the flames, Kono stood with his arms crossed, a smug look on his face. He pointed a finger directly at Rose as she emerged from the path. "There!" he roared, his voice carrying over the crackle of the fire. "The white woman! This is her doing! It is her curse! She has brought destruction upon us, just as I said she would." The entire tribe turned to look at her. 100 pairs of eyes now filled not just with suspicion, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. Her one moment of hope had been burned to the ground along with their food. She was no longer just an omen. She was a saboteur, a witch, and they were coming for her. The crowd surged forward, an angry mob with murder in their eyes. Rose was frozen in terror. This was it. This was how she would die. But Niati was there in an instant, placing himself between her and the mob, his knife drawn. Tavibo stood beside him, his face grim. "Enough!" the chief bellowed, his voice silencing the crowd. "There is no proof she did this." "The proof is in the flames," Kono shouted. "She is bad medicine. We must cleanse the tribe of her." "This is your doing, Kono," Niati accused, his voice seething with rage. "You set this fire to turn the people against her." "Prove it," Kono sneered. "You have no proof, but we have a motive. She is a spy for Thornfield, sent here to weaken us before he attacks." The accusation was absurd, but in their fear and anger, the people believed it. They began to chant, their voices rising in a terrifying chorus. "Kill her! Kill her!" Tavibo raised his hands for silence. "We will hold a council at dawn," he declared. "She will be tried. If she is found guilty, she will be punished according to our laws. Until then, she will be guarded." It was a temporary reprieve, but it felt like a death sentence. Rose was dragged to a small, isolated teepee, and 2 warriors were posted outside. The trial was a formality. Kono had won. He had turned the entire tribe against her. She would be found guilty. And the punishment for endangering the tribe, she knew, was death. As she sat alone in the dark, waiting for the dawn that would bring her execution, she thought of Niati. He had defended her, believed in her, but he couldn't fight his entire tribe. She was alone, utterly and completely alone. Just before the first light of dawn, the flap of the teepee was silently lifted. It was Niati. "We have to go," he whispered urgently. "The council will condemn you." My father cannot stop it. Go where? Rose asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. There's nowhere to go. They will find us. I know a place, he said, pulling her to her feet. A hidden canyon. We can hide there until I can find proof that Kono set the fire. It was an insane risk. If they were caught, they would both be killed as traitors. But staying meant certain death for her. She had no choice. She trusted him. They slipped out of the teepee and into the pre-dawn gloom. Niati moved like a shadow, guiding her through the sleeping camp. They were almost clear when a dog barked. Then another. Figures began to emerge from the teepees. A shout went up. They're escaping! They had been discovered. Run! Niati yelled, grabbing her hand. They sprinted for the cliffs, arrows whistling past them in the dark. It was a desperate, mad dash for their lives. They reached the line of horses and Niati practically threw her onto his paint horse before leaping up behind her. He spurred the horse into a gallop, away from the camp, away from the only home he had ever known. He was an outcast now, too, a traitor for her. They rode hard, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Niati guided the horse into a narrow, winding canyon, the rock walls rising steeply on either side. The path was treacherous, but he navigated it with breathtaking skill. After what felt like hours, the sounds of pursuit faded. Niati slowed the horse, finally bringing it to a stop in a small, hidden alcove with a spring-fed pool. They were safe for now. They won't find us here, Niati said, his chest heaving as he dismounted. Not for a while. Rose slid off the horse, her body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. She looked at him, at the sacrifice he had just made for her. They will call you a traitor, she whispered, her heart aching for him. You've lost everything because of me. He stepped toward her, his face serious. I have not lost everything, he said, his voice low and intense. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands. If they had killed you, then I would have lost everything that matters. And then he kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste, gentle kiss by the creek. This was a kiss born of desperation and fear, of sacrifice and a love that defied all logic. It was a brand, sealing their fates together. They were fugitives now, hunted by both their peoples. They had nothing but each other and a desperate, impossible plan to find proof of Kono's treachery and Marcus Thornfield's murder before their enemies found them. For weeks they lived in the hidden canyon. It was a harsh, stripped-down existence, but Rose had never felt more alive. Niati taught her to track, to hunt with a bow, to read the signs of the land. She grew stronger, leaner, her skin tanned by the sun. The soft, helpless girl who had fled a wedding was gone forever, replaced by a woman of the wilderness, but their love, which deepened with every passing day, was overshadowed by the constant threat of discovery. One night, as they sat by their small, smokeless fire, Niati grew quiet. What is it? Rose asked. Kono is not working alone, he said, staring into the flames. The fire at the camp, it was too well timed, and he is not smart enough to have planned it so perfectly. Someone is helping him, someone who wants me and my father out of the way. Marcus, Rose breathed. It has to be. Yes, Niati agreed. Thornfield wants this land, the land the government promised us in the treaty. My father is the only one who stands in his way. If he can discredit my father by making me look like a traitor and installing Kono as a puppet chief, he can get what he wants. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, revealing a picture more sinister than they had imagined. This wasn't just about revenge for Niati's mother. It was about greed on a massive scale. We have to get back to the camp, Rose said. We have to warn your father. We can't, Niati said grimly. They would kill us on sight. We need proof, something undeniable that shows Kono is working with Thornfield. Their only hope was to get close to Marcus himself. It was a suicide mission. The town of Millbrook was heavily guarded, and Marcus was a powerful man with eyes and ears everywhere. But they had no other choice. Disguised under the cover of darkness, they made their way to the outskirts of the town. Niati, with his Comanche features, could not enter, but Rose could. She pulled her hair back under a worn bonnet, smudged dirt on her face, and wrapped herself in a tattered shawl. She looked like just another poor, desperate settler woman. This is too dangerous, Niati whispered, his hand tight on her arm. Let me find another way. There is no other way, Rose insisted, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. I know his house. I know the people. I can do this. She kissed him one last time. I will be back before sunrise. Walking into the town she had fled was a surreal experience. The familiar streets now seemed alien and threatening. She kept to the shadows, her eyes scanning for any sign of recognition. She made her way to the back of Marcus Thornfield's large, imposing mansion. She knew there was a cellar entrance that was often left unlocked. Her heart was in her throat as she lifted the heavy wooden door and slipped into the darkness below. The cellar was damp and smelled of earth and wine. She navigated by touch, her goal to find the stairs leading up to the main house. She needed to get to Marcus's study. If there was proof of his dealings with Kono, it would be there. She found the stairs and crept up into the silent house. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot. She moved down the hallway, her hand trailing along the wall until she reached the heavy oak door of the study. It was unlocked. She slipped inside and closed it behind her. The room was just as she remembered it. Opulent, suffocating, dominated by a massive desk. A single lamp cast a low glow, and for a terrifying second, she thought Marcus was there. But the chair was empty. She rushed to the desk and began to search, her fingers flying through drawers filled with papers. Ledgers, deeds, contracts. It was a mountain of paperwork. She was running out of time. Where would he keep something secret? She ran her hands along the underside of the desk and felt a small, hidden latch. She pressed it, and a secret compartment sprang open. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The entries were in Marcus's own hand. It was all there. Detailed notes of his payments to Kono, his plan to incite a tribal war, his instructions for the fire, and then her blood turned to ice. She found an entry from years ago. The Comanche healer is becoming a problem. She knows too much about my business with the land office. Took care of it tonight. A special poison from the east. They will think it is the fever. No one will ever know. He had murdered Niati's mother, and he was proud of it. Rose grabbed the journal, her mind reeling. This was it, the proof they needed. But as she turned to leave, the door creaked open. Marcus Thornfield stood there, a silk robe wrapped around his portly frame. A cruel smile spread across his face. Well, well, he said, his voice a low, menacing purr. Look what the cat dragged in. The runaway bride. I knew you'd come crawling back sooner or later. He saw the journal in her hand, and his smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure fury. Give me that, he snarled, lunging for her. Rose dodged, clutching the journal to her chest. She ran for the door, but he was surprisingly fast. He grabbed her by the arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. You stupid girl, he hissed, his face inches from hers, his breath foul. You've ruined everything. He backhanded her across the face, the force of the blow sending her staggering back. The journal flew from her grasp, skittering across the polished floor. Before she could recover, he was on her, his hands closing around her throat. I should have done this the day you were born, he choked out, his eyes bulging with rage. Rose clawed at his hands, her vision starting to swim in black spots. She was going to die, here, in this room at the hands of this monster. But then, the window behind Marcus shattered. A figure crashed through, landing in a crouch on the floor. It was Niati. He had followed her. He had known she was in trouble. He rose to his full height, a silent, avenging angel of death. Marcus spun around, his eyes wide with shock and fear. He released Rose, who collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. You! Marcus stammered, backing away. Niati didn't speak. He just advanced, his knife in his hand, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. Marcus fumbled in his desk drawer, pulling out a pistol. He aimed it at Niati, his hand trembling. Stay back, you savage, he screamed. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Marcus's gun. The bullet struck Marcus in the shoulder, causing him to cry out and drop the pistol. Standing in the shattered window frame was another figure, holding a smoking rifle. It was Tavibo, the chief. He was flanked by a dozen of his most loyal warriors. They had followed Niati. They had seen the truth in his actions. "It is over, Thornfield," Tavibo said, his voice like the rumble of an avalanche. While his warriors subdued the wounded Marcus, Tavibo walked over and picked up the journal from the floor. He flipped through the pages, his face a grim mask. He didn't need to read English to understand the numbers, the dates, the name Kono written over and over. He looked at Niati and then at Rose, who was now huddled on the floor. And for the first time, he looked at her with something other than suspicion. He looked at her with respect. They took Marcus and the journal back to the camp. When the tribe was shown the proof of Kono's betrayal and Thornfield's crimes, a wave of shame and anger swept through them. Kono was brought before the council. He spat and cursed, but the evidence was undeniable. He was exiled, banished to wander the plains alone, a fate worse than death for a Comanche. As for Marcus, they did not kill him. They tied him to a horse and sent him back to Millbrook with the journal tied around his neck, a message to the white authorities. They would let the white man's justice deal with him. News of his crimes, especially the murder of his previous wives, spread like wildfire. His empire crumbled. He would spend the rest of his miserable life in a prison cell. That evening, a great feast was held in the Comanche camp, a feast to celebrate justice and to welcome a new member into their tribe. Tavibo stood before his people, with Rose and Niati at his side. "This woman," he announced, his voice booming across the firelit valley, "came to us as a stranger, an omen. But she was not an omen of destruction. She was an omen of truth. She has the heart of a Comanche. She is one of us now." He placed a hand on Rose's shoulder and then on his son's. "They have fought for their love and for the honor of this tribe. They will be joined as one." The tribe erupted in a roar of approval. Chayton was the first to approach Rose, her eyes filled with a shame Rose had never expected to see. "I was wrong about you," Chayton said, bowing her head. "You are worthy of him. You are worthy of us." Rose had found her home. 6 months later, she stood on the same cliff where she had once contemplated ending her life. The deerskin dress she wore was soft against her skin, and a gentle bulge was beginning to show at her belly. She was no longer an outcast. She was Niati's wife, a respected member of the tribe, and a mother-to-be. Niati came up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her. "Any regrets?" he whispered, his familiar, teasing question. She leaned back against his chest, looking out at the endless land that was her home. She saw not an empty wilderness, but a future filled with love and promise. "None," she said, her voice filled with a peace she had never known. "I have everything I ever wanted." She had run from a life that was a gilded cage, only to find true freedom in the most unexpected of places. She had wrestled with fate and won. And as the sun set, she knew her story was not an ending, but a beginning. What did you think of Rose's incredible journey? Would you have had the courage to risk everything, to walk into the lion's den to uncover the truth? And what about Niati, who chose to become a traitor to his people in order to save the woman he loved? These are the choices that forge legends. If their story of courage, sacrifice, and unbreakable love moved you, then please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is the lifeblood that allows us to keep telling these powerful stories that explore the depths of the human heart. By joining our family, you help us ensure that these tales of heroism and hope continue to be told. It means the world to us. And now the question remains, what new challenges will the next chapter of history reveal?